New London School Explosion 1937. It was an ordinary Thursday in New London, Texas, on March 18, 1937, until the ground suddenly shook, and the school vanished in a roar of fire and dust. In a single moment, the pride of the small oil town, the London School, was blown apart. The blast was so powerful that it lifted the building off the ground and threw a concrete slab hundreds of feet away. For months, the school had been using cheap gas from nearby oil fields to heat the classrooms. The gas had no smell, so when it began leaking into the space beneath the building, no one knew. That afternoon, a teacher in the shop class switched on an electric sander, and a single spark ignited the trapped gas. The entire school exploded. Parents waiting nearby ran toward the ruins, tearing through rubble with their bare hands to find their children. Oil field workers brought their equipment to help, while doctors, nurses, and volunteers rushed in from all over Texas. The new Mother Frances Hospital in Tyler opened early just to treat the injured. A young reporter named Walter Cronkite was there and later said that nothing in his life compared to what he saw that day. Nearly 300 children and teachers were killed. Almost every family in town lost someone. The grief was unimaginable. Messages of sympathy came from across the world, even one from Adolf Hitler. No one was ever punished, but the tragedy changed safety laws forever. Texas quickly passed a rule that all natural gas must have a smell added so leaks could be noticed. A new school was built, and a memorial still stands nearby. The New London disaster changed safety forever, proving how something unseen, a simple gas leak, could bring unimaginable tragedy. But decades later, that same lesson was forgotten. 73 years after that terrible day in Texas, another hidden danger lay beneath a quiet neighborhood in California. And when it finally broke loose, the streets of San Bruno were engulfed in flames. San Bruno pipeline explosion, 2010. On September 9, 2010, the people of San Bruno, California, sat down for dinner as the sun set. Then, without warning, their world turned into an inferno. A 30-inch gas pipeline buried under Glenview Drive had exploded, tearing open the street and sending flames hundreds of feet high. People thought a plane had crashed. That's how violent it was. The pipeline belonged to Pacific Gas and Electric, and it had been in the ground since 1956. Investigators later discovered it was built with a faulty weld that had gone unnoticed for decades. Natural gas had been rushing through that pipe every day, and on this evening, the weak seam finally gave way. The explosion blew a crater 70 feet long, destroyed 38 homes, and damaged dozens more. The fire burned so fiercely that firefighters couldn't get close. Broken water lines left hydrants dry, and gas kept feeding the flames for hours. 8 people were killed, and more than 50 were hurt. Entire families lost their homes. Many survivors said it looked like the end of the world. When the fire was finally out, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board found years of mistakes, poor record-keeping, bad welds, and no automatic shutoff valves to stop the gas. The system meant to protect people had failed completely. PG&E faced massive fines and lawsuits, paying hundreds of millions of dollars to victims. The tragedy led to strict new pipeline safety laws across California and the country. But for the people of San Bruno, no amount of change could undo that night, when a hidden flaw deep beneath their street tore open their world in fire. Merrimack Valley gas explosions, 2018. On September 13, 2018, the quiet towns of Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover in Massachusetts were thrown into chaos. One moment, everything was normal. Kids coming home from school, people cooking dinner, and the next, houses were bursting into flames. The cause was a deadly mistake buried deep underground. Columbia Gas of Massachusetts had been replacing old pipes, but engineers failed to move a key pressure sensor line during the work. When the system was turned back on, gas flooded into the low-pressure lines at dangerously high levels. Stoves, furnaces, and even gas meters became ticking bombs. In Lawrence, one explosion destroyed a home so violently that its chimney collapsed onto a nearby car. Inside was 18-year-old Leonel Rondon. He was killed instantly. 22 others were injured, including firefighters who battled the blazes. In total, around 130 buildings were damaged or destroyed, and thousands of residents were forced to flee their homes as emergency crews cut off gas and power to stop the chain of explosions. The investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board found that the disaster was caused by poor engineering oversight and a complete lack of proper safety systems. The gas company had no backup protection against overpressure, a mistake that cost lives and devastated entire communities. Columbia Gas eventually admitted fault, paid millions in fines, and was forced to leave Massachusetts entirely. That day changed everything for the Merrimack Valley. What began as routine pipeline work ended in fear, destruction, and heartbreak. For the people who lost their homes and loved ones, it was a cruel reminder of how one small oversight can set an entire town on fire. St. Cloud explosion, 1998. It started like any other Friday in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Cold air, busy streets, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from downtown cafes. But on December 11, 1998, beneath that ordinary morning, danger was quietly building under the pavement. A construction crew installing a utility pole had accidentally struck a high-pressure gas line buried below the sidewalk. For nearly 40 minutes, natural gas hissed invisibly into the ground, seeping into nearby buildings. Workers and emergency crews gathered, trying to figure out what was wrong, and then a spark set off an enormous blast that tore through downtown. The explosion leveled buildings and shattered windows blocks away. A pizzeria, law offices, and small shops were instantly destroyed. 4 people were killed, including workers and bystanders who had no time to escape, and 11 others were injured, among them firefighters and police officers. Flames roared through the debris as rescuers fought to save anyone trapped inside. When investigators pieced together what happened, the story was painfully clear. The accident could have been prevented. The crew hadn't followed proper safety steps when digging near gas lines, and communication failures slowed the response. The National Transportation Safety Board blamed both the construction company and local emergency services for poor training and coordination. Downtown St. Cloud was rebuilt, but the scars ran deep. The blast changed how cities handle gas leaks and construction safety, but history still had more to teach. And sometimes the same danger hides in plain sight. 30 years earlier, in another small American town, the same invisible threat struck. That time, it wasn't Minnesota, but Richmond, Indiana, where an ordinary Saturday afternoon turned into chaos and fire. Richmond, Indiana explosion, 1968. Downtown Richmond, Indiana was buzzing with life on April 6, 1968. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and people were shopping, talking, and enjoying the weekend. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A massive explosion tore through Main Street, shaking the entire city. The blast blew out windows for blocks, sent cars flying, and filled the air with smoke and fire. The explosion started under a sporting goods store called Marting Arms. A natural gas leak had been building up unnoticed beneath the street, seeping into the store's basement. Inside, the shop also had gunpowder and ammunition stored for sale. When the gas finally ignited, the gunpowder went up too, triggering a second, even bigger explosion that destroyed buildings and sent debris raining down. The scene was heartbreaking. 41 people were killed, and more than 100 were hurt. Fires burned across downtown as rescuers and volunteers rushed in to help. Firefighters battled flames while ordinary people used whatever they could, doors, boards, their own hands, to pull survivors from the rubble. The sound of popping ammunition echoed through the smoke. Investigators later discovered that an old gas pipe had corroded and leaked, causing the disaster. The local gas company was found responsible and paid millions in settlements. The tragedy also led to stronger safety laws for gas lines across the country. Richmond's downtown was eventually rebuilt, but the memory of that day never faded. A memorial now stands near the site, engraved with the names of the 41 people who lost their lives. For those who lived through it, April 6, 1968 will always be remembered as the day their peaceful town was shattered in a single terrible moment. R.M. Palmer Candy Factory Explosion 2023. March 24, 2023 began like any other day at the R.M. Palmer Candy Factory in West Reading, Pennsylvania. Workers were finishing their shifts, machines were running, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But beneath the floor of Building 2, danger was silently spreading, a natural gas leak that no one could see or smell in time. The gas slowly filled the basement until, without warning, it ignited. The explosion was enormous. It completely destroyed Building 2, heavily damaged the one next to it, and struck a nearby apartment complex with such force that several families were forced to leave their homes. First responders rushed in within minutes, fighting fires and digging through rubble, but the blast had already taken 7 workers' lives and injured 10 more. Buildings around the site were left cracked, burned, and unsafe. When investigators looked into what went wrong, they found the leak started from an old fitting installed back in 1982. Over the years, it had worn out and let gas seep underground. To make things worse, a rusty old steam pipe nearby had cracked and was leaking hot steam, which likely sped up the damage to that fitting. That pipe wasn't even marked, and no one realized how bad its condition was. Workers had smelled gas before the explosion and reported it, but help came too late. The factory didn't have proper alarms or safety procedures for gas leaks, so no evacuation happened in time. Later, OSHA fined the company for not protecting its workers and failing to act fast enough. The investigation showed that most victims died from the blast and burns, and when the NTSB reviewed the case in December 2024, they made it clear this disaster wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of aging equipment, ignored warnings, and poor safety systems. Carlsbad, New Mexico explosion, 2000. It was still dark on August 19, 2000, when a quiet campground near Carlsbad, New Mexico, was suddenly lit up by a wall of fire. A group of family and friends was sleeping under a bridge by the Pecos River when, without warning, the ground erupted. A huge natural gas pipeline buried nearby had exploded, sending flames shooting hundreds of feet into the air. The fireball was so bright that people in Carlsbad, who were nearly 20 miles away, could see the sky glowing orange. The explosion came from a 30-inch pipeline owned by El Paso Natural Gas. It had been running smoothly for decades, but inside, corrosion had been eating away at the steel. Over time, the pipe walls had thinned so much that they couldn't handle the pressure anymore. When the line finally burst, gas poured out and ignited instantly, creating a crater nearly 90 feet long and 20 feet deep. The fire burned for nearly an hour, destroying everything around it. 12 people, all campers, were killed in the blast. Their vehicles and tents were reduced to ashes. The intense heat melted metal, scorched the bridge above, and damaged nearby pipelines. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board later confirmed that the cause was severe internal corrosion that the company's maintenance program had completely missed. They found that this section of pipe hadn't been cleaned or inspected properly in years, and that regulators had failed to catch those lapses. The tragedy led to new rules for monitoring corrosion and maintaining older pipelines. But for the families who lost loved ones, it was too late. That morning near Carlsbad showed just how dangerous a silent problem deep inside a pipeline can be, and how quickly a peaceful night by the river can turn into a nightmare of fire and loss. Bellingham Pipeline Explosion, 1999. On June 10, 1999, a sunny afternoon in Bellingham, Washington, turned into one of the darkest days in the city's history. In Whatcom Falls Park, families were out enjoying the day. Kids were playing by the creek, and an 18-year-old named Liam Wood was fishing, completely unaware that a deadly disaster was about to happen beneath the ground. A pipeline owned by Olympic Pipeline had ruptured, spilling hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline into Whatcom Creek. The gas quickly spread through the water, coating the rocks and filling the air with invisible fumes. Minutes later, it ignited. A massive explosion tore through the park, sending a fireball racing nearly a mile and a half downstream. Trees exploded into flames. The creek turned into a river of fire, and thick black smoke towered over the city. 3 people lost their lives. Liam Wood was overcome by the gasoline fumes and drowned before the blast. 10-year-olds Wade King and Steven Ciorvas were playing near the creek when it ignited. Both suffered terrible burns and died the next day. Dozens more were injured, and homes near the park were damaged or destroyed. Over 25 acres of forest and riverbank burned, and thousands of fish and animals died as the creek became a toxic wasteland. Investigators later discovered the tragedy could have been prevented. The pipeline had been damaged years earlier and never repaired properly. Faulty valves and computer systems failed to stop the flow of gasoline when pressure started to rise. Olympic Pipeline and its parent companies were found responsible and paid millions in fines and settlements. Today, Whatcom Creek is green again, but the scars remain. Memorials mark where the children played, and the people of Bellingham still remember that summer day when a quiet creek turned into a river of fire. East Harlem gas explosion, 2014. It was a bright Wednesday morning on March 12, 2014, when East Harlem woke to one of the most violent explosions in New York City's recent history. Just after residents had started their day, a deafening blast ripped through 2 apartment buildings on Park Avenue, shattering windows, setting off car alarms, and sending a thick cloud of smoke and dust into the sky. In seconds, entire buildings were reduced to rubble and the streets filled with chaos and screams. The explosion came from a natural gas leak that had silently filled the basements of 1644 and 1646 Park Avenue. A faulty plastic connection in a gas line had been leaking for days, maybe weeks, and a broken sewer pipe beneath the street had weakened the ground, putting more strain on the gas main. The mixture of gas and air built up until it finally found a spark. The result was catastrophic. 8 people were killed, more than 50 were injured, and hundreds were left without homes. The blast was so powerful that it could be felt blocks away and even registered on earthquake monitors. Firefighters and rescue crews rushed in, searching through piles of twisted debris for survivors while gas still hissed in the wreckage. Investigators later discovered that the gas line connection, installed by Con Edison in 2011, had a defective joint that allowed gas to escape. They also found that the city had ignored a damaged sewer line that contributed to the failure. The tragedy was the result of bad maintenance, weak oversight, and missed warnings. Basically, a deadly mix. Years later, Con Edison paid millions in penalties. But no amount of money could erase what East Harlem went through that day. A neighborhood forever marked by the morning when an invisible leak tore its heart apart.